Many of us were taught that being kind, being nice, being agreeable is the highest virtue. That to be loved, we must always say yes, be accommodating, keep the peace, be the fixer, the one others can lean on. But somewhere along the way, the kindness we so carefully cultivated begins to feel like a burden, as if we are wearing a mask, not out of authenticity, but in hopes of being accepted. You stay late at work to help a colleague finish their task. You carry the consequences for someone who should have been responsible for their own actions. But the hardest part isn't the effort. It's the quiet, hollow feeling that follows, that you've been overlooked, unappreciated, or worse, as if you don't even exist. A quiet sorrow, and sometimes a very loud one that we try our best to silence. An exhausted soul, a voice that has never been allowed to speak for fear of being labeled selfish. So it's worth asking, when we're constantly trying to be the nice one, are we truly being good? Are we truly compassionate, or just afraid to draw a line? And what if this ongoing effort to be endlessly generous is slowly destroying our emotional well-being and dimming the very light of our kindness? This isn't just emotional fatigue. This is spiritual misalignment. In Buddhism, compassion is revered as sacred, but it is not the same as people-pleasing. Compassion is born from wisdom. It is the open heart and open mind that do not lose themselves in the process of loving others. And this is where our journey begins. Because this video is not here to tell you to stop being kind. It is here to show you how to be kind without losing yourself, to help you escape the exhausting cycle of overgiving, self-denial, and emotional depletion. To help you understand that true compassion is not servitude, and that setting boundaries is not selfish. It is a sacred act of self-respect. Together we'll explore what Buddhism teaches about the middle way and how it helps us avoid extremes, even the extreme of self-sacrifice. Why saying yes too often may be a subtle form of attachment rooted in fear and guilt. How to tell the difference between mindful generosity and the kind of giving that quietly drains you. And most importantly, how to reclaim your voice, your space, and your energy without shame or apology. But this won't be just philosophy. In this video, I'll share with you real stories of people who gave until they broke and how they returned to peace through mindfulness. You'll hear the story of a young woman who became everyone's emotional anchor until the weight nearly crushed her. The story of a retired father who realized far too late that his kindness had turned into silent resentment. And even my own story of the years I lived mistaking acceptance for love until mindfulness taught me otherwise. These are not stories of failure. They are stories of awakening. Because at the heart of Buddhist teachings lies this truth: you cannot pour from an empty cup. The more we abandon ourselves in the name of peace, the more conflict we sow, within and without. Boundaries are not walls that shut people out. They are bridges, built with mutual respect. So take a deep breath. Set down the need to please everyone. Lay aside the fear of being misunderstood, and step into this moment with a quiet intention. To know yourself more deeply than ever before. This is not just a video, it is a path of mindfulness, a path of sacred boundaries, a path of returning, gently and lovingly, home to yourself. Let us begin. Chapter 1, The Hidden Cost of Being Too Nice. We've all been there. You smile, nod, say, "Sure, no problem." Even when your chest feels tight, your calendar's already full, and your gut whispers, "This isn't right." Or staying on the phone to comfort someone when all you want is 5 minutes of silence. Or agreeing to dinner plans when what your body truly needs is rest. On the surface, these acts seem noble. Kindness is, after all, one of the most celebrated virtues. We're praised for being accommodating, liked for being agreeable, rewarded for being the one who never complains. But underneath that shiny exterior of niceness, something is quietly breaking. Because being too nice isn't free. It comes at a cost, and often that cost is you. The silent toll of self-abandonment. In Buddhism, suffering dukkha often arises not from external events, but from internal imbalances, clinging, resistance, and ignorance of our true nature. And one of the most overlooked imbalances is self-abandonment in the name of goodness. When we consistently prioritize others' needs over our own, we begin to erode the foundation of our inner peace. We trade authenticity for approval. We give, not from wholeness, but from obligation. And over time, we begin to disappear. You might not even notice it at first. It starts with small compromises, a missed lunch, a delayed dream, a swallowed opinion. But left unchecked, these moments compound into emotional depletion, physical fatigue, and an aching sense of invisibility. We start to wonder, does anyone see me? Does anyone care what I need? But here's the real question. Do you see yourself? Because the truth is, people often treat us the way we've trained them to. When we say yes too easily, too often, we unintentionally teach others to expect our sacrifice. And then, when we finally reach our breaking point, the world looks at us, confused, and says, "But you've always been so nice." The middle way isn't martyrdom. The Buddha taught the path of the middle way, a balanced life free from extremes. It's a path of neither indulgence nor asceticism, neither self-centeredness nor self-erasure. But many of us mistake kindness for perfectionism, selflessness for sainthood. We confuse people-pleasing with compassion, and that confusion costs us deeply. Because when kindness becomes a mask we wear to avoid conflict, gain approval, or escape guilt, it ceases to be kindness. It becomes a strategy of survival, born not from love, but from fear. In Buddhist psychology, the root of this behavior is attachment, particularly to the idea of being seen as good. And this attachment, like all others, leads to suffering. Let's be clear, compassion is beautiful, generosity is powerful. But when they come without wisdom, when they lack mindful boundaries, they burn us out instead of lifting us up. Let me tell you about Julia, a hospice nurse I once met during a retreat. For 15 years, she gave her heart and soul to her patients and their families. She stayed long hours, she attended funerals, she remembered birthdays. Everyone called her an angel. But behind the scenes, Julia was unraveling. She hadn't taken a vacation in years. Her own health was declining. Her relationships had thinned. One night after collapsing from exhaustion, she admitted to herself something terrifying. "I give so much, but I don't even know who I am anymore." That moment became her turning point. Julia began studying mindfulness and Buddhist philosophy, not to become less caring, but to learn how to care without disappearing. Through daily meditation and gentle self-reflection, she began noticing her patterns. The fear of saying no, the pride she took in being indispensable, the guilt she felt even thinking about her own needs. She started small, taking one full day off a week, saying, "Let me get back to you," instead of defaulting to yes, and practicing metta, loving kindness meditation, not just for others, but for herself. And slowly, the burnout faded. Her joy returned. And she realized true kindness doesn't require self-sacrifice, it requires self-connection. Buddhist teachings often challenge us to see through the illusion of a fixed, solid self, especially the ego's constructed identities. And one of the trickiest identities to dismantle is the good person. Many of us cling to this persona because it gives us value. We equate being liked with being lovable. We mistake being useful for being worthy. So we bend, we overextend. We make ourselves small so others can feel large. But in the Dharma, self-worth doesn't come from others' validation. It comes from knowing your intrinsic nature, your Buddha nature, untainted, unshakable, and free. You are not here to be consumed by others' needs. You are here to awaken, to serve from fullness, not from fear. And awakening begins when you ask yourself, am I giving freely or from a sense of obligation? Do I feel resentful after I say yes? Am I more concerned with being liked than being true? If the answer is yes to any of these, it's time to pause, breathe, and gently redirect yourself back to the middle way. What you lose when you're too nice. Being too nice may earn you applause, but it robs you of your time, your energy, your authenticity, your voice. More dangerously, it teaches your inner self that your needs don't matter, that your worth is conditional on what you can do for others. And over time, that narrative buries your joy. But here's the truth that Buddhism reminds us. You, yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. Okay, the Buddha. Let that sink in. Not just love from others, love from yourself. A new kind of generosity. Imagine a new way of being, where your kindness is rooted not in fear of rejection, but in fullness of spirit, where your boundaries are not walls, but sacred invitations for mutual respect, where your yes carries weight because your no is honored. This is not selfishness, this is spiritual maturity. As Thich Nhat Hanh once wrote, you must love in such a way that the person you love feels free. That includes yourself. Are you ready to step into that freedom? In the next chapter, we'll explore how attachment to approval feeds the cycle of overgiving and what it truly means to release that craving through the lens of Buddhist wisdom. But before we go on, pause. Place your hand on your heart and ask gently, have I been too nice at the cost of my peace? That answer may be the beginning of your healing. Chapter 2. The attachment to approval. A hidden driver. Think back to when you were a child. Maybe it was the smile you got when you brought home a good grade, or the praise you heard when you shared your toys, or the approval that came when you stayed quiet, polite, and agreeable. That's when the pattern began. We learned early on that being liked felt safe, being praised felt right. Approval became a form of love, a way to feel seen, accepted, and valued. But now, years later, many of us are still chasing that same approval. Not from parents or teachers, but from bosses, spouses, friends, even strangers online. And without realizing it, this deep attachment to being approved of, to being liked, applauded, included, has become one of the most powerful forces shaping our lives. Especially for those of us in midlife, the pressure can be overwhelming. We're trying to be dependable at work, supportive at home, kind to everyone. We tell ourselves, I'm just being nice. But deep down, we're exhausted. The hidden need beneath the niceness. In Buddhism, attachment, or tanha, is described as one of the main causes of suffering. We often think of attachment in terms of material things, money, status, comfort. But emotional attachment is just as powerful. And one of the most subtle, sneaky forms of attachment is the need for approval. When we constantly seek validation from others, we give them the power to decide our worth. When we act out of fear of being disliked, we abandon our authenticity. And when we define our goodness by how much we're appreciated, we walk a path built not on freedom, but on fear. This is the hidden cost of people-pleasing. It isn't just tiring, it disconnects us from who we really are. Breaking the cycle with mindfulness. Buddhism offers us a powerful tool, mindfulness, the ability to observe our thoughts and behaviors with curiosity instead of judgment. When we apply mindfulness to our craving for approval, we begin to notice how often we say yes when we mean no, how uncomfortable silence becomes when someone is upset with us, how we over-explain ourselves just to avoid being misunderstood. These moments become our windows into awareness, and from awareness, change becomes possible. Mindfulness helps us ask the hard but healing questions. Why am I doing this? Am I being true to myself or just trying to be liked? What would I do if I didn't care about being praised? Sometimes the answers surprise us. Other times they free us. From false self to true self. In Buddhist thought, there is a concept called anatta, or non-self. It teaches us that the self we often try to protect, the one that needs to be liked, admired, needed, isn't fixed or permanent. It's a collection of ideas, habits, roles, a mask we wear, and the more we cling to that mask, the good mom, the reliable employee, the selfless friend, the more we suffer when it starts to crack. Because deep inside, something wiser is calling. Not the version of you that others expect, but the version of you that is rooted in truth, not approval, and that version doesn't need to impress anyone. Shifting from approval to authenticity. So what does it actually look like to let go of this attachment in daily life? Sometimes it means saying, I need some time to think about it, instead of rushing to say yes. Letting a friend feel disappointed and trusting they'll still love you. Speaking honestly in a meeting, even if your opinion is unpopular. Wearing what you love, not what others expect. Doing less and being okay with it. These aren't dramatic rebellions. They're small acts of authenticity, and each time you choose them, you take a step away from the prison of approval and a step closer to the freedom of self-acceptance. The peace that comes from within. The Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. True peace doesn't come from being liked. It comes from living in alignment with your deepest values. It comes from saying, this is who I am, and that is enough. And when we practice that kind of honesty, something beautiful happens. We attract the kind of relationships where we don't have to perform. We build trust, not just with others, but with ourselves. And we finally start to feel at home in our own skin. Let that be your beginning. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to set healthy boundaries without guilt, and how Buddhist wisdom can help you protect your peace while staying rooted in compassion. But for now, breathe. Let go of the need to be liked, and gently return to the person you were before the world told you who to be. Chapter 3. Boundaries are bridges, not walls. When we hear the word boundary, many of us think of walls. Cold, unmovable, meant to shut people out. But in Buddhist practice, boundaries are something entirely different. They're not about isolation, they're about connection. Not about rejection, but about respect. Boundaries, when grounded in mindfulness and compassion, are like bridges. They create healthy space between people. Space where clarity, honesty, and genuine care can exist. They're not barriers to love. They're the conditions that make love sustainable. Why we struggle with boundaries for so many of us, especially those in midlife who carry multiple roles. Setting boundaries feel wrong. It feels selfish. It feels like we're letting people down. It feels like we're not doing enough. And that's because many of us were raised with the idea that love means self-sacrifice, that being a good person means being endlessly available, that saying no is cold or unkind. But Buddhism teaches us something radically different. You are not responsible for everyone's happiness. In fact, when you try to be, you prevent others from growing. And worse, you slowly burn out your own spirit. That's not compassion, that's codependence. A garden needs fences. Think of a beautiful garden. It's full of blooming flowers, strong trees, and nourishing vegetables. But without a clear fence, anything can enter. Pests, animals, even careless footsteps that trample the soil. A fence isn't there to keep beauty out. It's there to protect what's sacred within. You are that garden. Your energy, your time, your emotional space. They are living, breathing parts of your inner world, and they need boundaries to thrive. Buddhism teaches that everything is impermanent, including your strength and emotional capacity. Even the most generous heart needs rest. Even the most peaceful mind needs protection. Boundaries are how we water the soil of our well-being. They are how we ensure that our compassion doesn't become corrosion. Setting boundaries with compassion. Setting boundaries doesn't have to be harsh. It can sound like, I'd love to help, but I don't have the energy right now. Let me think about that and get back to you. I need some time for myself this weekend. And it can feel like leaving a conversation that's draining your energy, choosing not to answer texts late at night, saying no without over-explaining. You don't have to justify protecting your peace. In fact, the more mindfully you set boundaries, the more others learn to respect you and themselves. Because your boundary isn't just for you. It's a model, a teaching, a reflection of self-respect that invites others to honor their own limits too. The Buddhist view. Boundaries as compassion. The Buddha once said, if your compassion does not include yourself, it is incomplete. Boundaries are not the opposite of compassion. They are the container that holds it. When we say no from a place of wisdom, not anger, when we protect our energy without shame, we are living the middle way. Not giving too much, not shutting others out, but walking the path of balance. And balance is where healing begins. So many of us give until we're dry, and we believe that's what makes us worthy. But Buddhism reminds us, you are already worthy. You do not have to earn love by giving beyond your capacity. When others resist your boundaries, sometimes when we begin to set boundaries, others push back. They might guilt us. They might act hurt. They might say things like, you've changed. But here's the truth. You are changing. You're growing. You're no longer willing to abandon yourself just to keep the peace. You're learning to speak up, even if your voice shakes. You're choosing presence over performance. And while it may ruffle feathers at first, the people who truly love you will adjust. Some will even thank you. Try this, a daily boundary check-in. Each evening, take a few quiet moments. Ask yourself, did I protect my energy today? Was I honest about what I could give? Where did I say yes when I really meant no? Then gently place your hand over your heart and say, it's okay to take care of myself. It's okay to rest. It's okay to say no. This is not disconnection. This is deep connection with your truth, your needs, your peace. Boundaries are love in action. So the next time you feel guilty for saying no or afraid to ask for space, remember this. You're not building a wall, you're building a bridge between you and others, grounded in truth. A bridge between your inner peace and outer world. A bridge between who you've been and who you're becoming. You are allowed to protect your energy. You are allowed to choose rest. You are allowed to live a life that feels good, not just looks good. This is the practice of sacred boundaries, and this is the next step on your path. Chapter 4. The guilt of saying no, releasing the inner judge. There's a unique kind of ache that follows the word no. It's not physical, it's not visible, but it lingers, heavy in the chest, tight in the throat. You finally say no to a family member's request. You turn down that extra project at work. You choose rest over one more obligation. And just when you think you've done the right thing for yourself, guilt creeps in. Am I being selfish? Did I let them down? What will they think of me now? If you felt this before, you're not alone. Guilt is one of the biggest emotional blocks we face when trying to set boundaries, especially if we've spent most of our lives trying to be helpful, dependable, and kind. But Buddhism offers us a different lens, one that helps us look beyond guilt, not to ignore it, but to understand its roots and gently release its grip. Understanding the inner judge. In Buddhist psychology, there is a concept often referred to as the inner critic or the inner judge. This is the voice in your head that constantly measures your worth against impossible standards. It whispers things like, you should have done more. You're not a good person if you say no. Other people are managing. Why can't you? This voice doesn't come from your true self. It's a product of years of conditioning, social expectations, family patterns, cultural messages. And while it may sound convincing, it's not your wisdom speaking. It's your fear. Fear of being rejected. Fear of being unloved. Fear of no longer being needed. The inner judge thrives on guilt because guilt keeps you compliant. But here's the truth. Compliance is not the same as compassion. The difference between guilt and conscience Buddhism teaches that emotions are not enemies. They are messengers. Guilt, when rooted in genuine harm done to others, can be healthy. It's a call to make amends, to return to alignment with our values. But most of the guilt we feel when saying no isn't because we've harmed someone. It's because we've disappointed them, or even just imagined that we might. And there's a big difference. Conscience is the inner compass that helps us live with integrity. Guilt, when distorted, becomes the echo chamber of insecurity. To release this guilt, we must begin to trust that caring for ourselves is not hurting others, that saying no is not a betrayal, but a boundary, that the discomfort we feel is not a sign of wrongness, but of growth. You are not here to please everyone. One of the most liberating truths the Buddha taught is that suffering arises from clinging, from trying to control outcomes, people, or perceptions. And one of the biggest illusions we cling to is the belief that we must keep everyone happy. But happiness isn't something we can give others on command. It's not our responsibility to fix every emotion, smooth every moment, or meet every unspoken expectation. You are not here to please everyone. You are here to live with awareness, to act from compassion, not compulsion, to serve from your heart, not from guilt. Reframing the no. In Western culture especially, no often feels final, cold, rejection. But in Buddhist thought, no can be a doorway to deeper clarity and connection. When you say no with mindfulness, you're not closing off love. You're preserving it. You're saying, I want to show up for you with integrity, not resentment. You're saying, I matter too. And that's not selfish, that's sacred. Because the quality of your yes depends on the honesty of your no. Let the guilt rise and let it go. One of the great practices in Buddhist meditation is observing without attachment. So when guilt arises, don't push it away. Let it rise. Notice it, feel it, but don't let it drive your choices. Say to yourself, guilt, I see you. I know where you come from, but I no longer need you to guide me. Let it pass like a cloud in the sky. Acknowledge but not clung to, because you are no longer a servant to guilt. In the next chapter, we'll explore the freedom that comes from emotional detachment and how letting go of over-identifying with others' feelings can lead to deeper peace and presence. But for now, take a moment. Place your hand on your heart and remember, you are not selfish for choosing peace. You are not unkind for setting limits. You are not wrong for saying no. You are simply learning to live with love and truth in balance. Chapter 5. Emotional detachment. The freedom of letting go. What if freedom doesn't come from managing everyone's emotions, but from realizing that you're not responsible for them? In fact, from a Buddhist perspective, true detachment is one of the most profound acts of love because it allows both you and others to be free. What emotional detachment really means. The word detachment can be misunderstood. To some, it sounds like indifference, as if you stop caring. But emotional detachment, in the Buddhist sense, doesn't mean withdrawing love. It means releasing control. It means you don't absorb other people's pain as your own. You don't feel responsible for fixing everyone's struggles. You don't allow other people's moods to dictate your inner peace. You can still be deeply compassionate. You can still care, support, and show up. But you no longer let someone else's chaos become your own. This is the heart of equanimity, a central Buddhist quality. It's the ability to stay grounded and balanced, even in the face of strong emotions, ours or others. The cost of carrying what isn't yours. Many of us were raised to believe that caring means caring. If someone is sad, we should feel it too. If someone is angry, we must fix it. If someone is struggling, it's on us to make it better. But here's the problem. When you carry everyone else's emotions, you slowly lose your own. Your energy becomes scattered. Your mood depends on everyone else's, and your sense of self becomes blurred by the needs, expectations, and pain of others. This isn't love, it's emotional fusion, and it's exhausting. Buddhism teaches that everything is interdependent, but not enmeshed. We are connected, but not the same. We can care, but we don't have to collapse. Letting go is loving clearly. There's a Buddhist phrase that says, attachment is not love. It is desire disguised. When we cling to the emotions of others, when we try to save them, fix them, or take on their suffering, it often comes from a hidden desire, the desire to be needed, to be appreciated, to be in control. But love, in its purest form, doesn't need control. It needs presence. When you let go emotionally, you don't love less. You love more clearly. You give others the dignity of their own journey. You honor their right to feel what they feel without trying to rush them through it. You stand beside them, but not inside their suffering. And that, paradoxically, is often what helps them heal the most. Signs you may be emotionally entangled. Emotional entanglement can be subtle. Here are a few signs that you might be holding on too tightly. You feel anxious when someone you care about is upset, even if it has nothing to do with you. You constantly try to fix people's emotions instead of just listening. You avoid setting boundaries because you fear hurting someone's feelings. You blame yourself for things outside your control. Your mood rises and falls with the emotional state of others. These patterns are human, they're common, but they can quietly drain your peace, shifting from fusion to freedom. So how do we begin to detach without disconnecting? Here are some simple but powerful shifts in perspective. Replace, I must fix this, with I will witness this. You are not the solution. You are the support. Let go of outcomes. You can offer love, advice, or care, but how others respond is their journey, not yours. Return to your breath. When emotions swirl around you, anchor into your body. Inhale, exhale, come home. Practice metta, loving kindness, for yourself and others. May they be well. May I be well. May we both find peace. Freedom isn't selfish, it's sacred. When you emotionally detach, something beautiful happens. You begin to trust others more. You give space for them to grow. You rediscover your own center, quiet, steady, present. You no longer feel like a sponge absorbing everything. You become a mirror, clear, calm, and compassionate. And in that mirror, others can finally see themselves clearly too. This is the freedom of letting go. Not a rejection of others, but a return to yourself. In the next chapter, we'll explore the spiritual power of silence and how choosing not to react can sometimes be the most powerful response of all. Chapter 6, The Wisdom of Silence. When saying nothing says everything. There's a moment that lives between reaction and response, a sacred pause, a breath that holds all the power in the world. Most of us miss it. We're taught to speak up, defend, explain, justify. We're told silence is weakness, that if we don't speak, we'll lose ground, respect, or connection. But Buddhism teaches something radically different. Sometimes silence is the highest form of wisdom, not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of awareness, not repression, but restraint. Silence, when practiced mindfully, doesn't create distance, it creates depth. Because to be silent, truly silent, is to reclaim your attention. Why we rush to fill the silence? We often rush to speak because silence feels uncomfortable. It exposes our uncertainty. It confronts our ego. It leaves room for truth to rise. But not all discomfort is bad. In fact, that tension within silence is where growth begins. When someone criticizes you, do you jump to defend yourself? When someone misunderstands you, do you scramble to explain? When someone projects their pain onto you, do you mirror it back? This is the dance of reactivity, but silence offers a different rhythm, a slower, more deliberate step. One that asks, is a reaction truly needed, or is my stillness the real strength here? Intentional silence isn't about suppressing your voice. It's about knowing when to use it and when not to. It sounds like choosing to listen without interrupting, taking a pause before responding, allowing emotions to settle before deciding what to say. It feels like confidence rooted in presence, not performance. Clarity rising from stillness, not struggle. Peace that doesn't need to be explained to be felt. Silence, when rooted in awareness, speaks louder than any defense. It communicates maturity, depth, and inner steadiness. Silence in relationships, whether romantic, familial, or professional, silence can be powerful medicine. It gives space. It allows reflection. It prevents escalation. Instead of reacting in the heat of anger, silence invites cooling. Instead of demanding to be understood immediately, silence creates room for understanding to arise naturally. It's not the silent treatment. It's the sacred space between stimulus and response. It's not shutting down. It's choosing stillness over sabotage. Silence as a daily practice. Just as we practice meditation to cultivate mindfulness, we can practice silence to cultivate inner strength. Try this. Set aside 10 minutes each day for intentional silence. No phone, no talking, just breath. When triggered, count to 5 before responding. Practice noble silence during meals. Eat in silence once a week and observe your thoughts. In conversations, resist the urge to fix or jump in. Let silence do the heavy lifting. You'll be surprised at what emerges in the space you used to fill with noise. Stillness is not emptiness. It's fullness without words. Silence is not empty. It is full of presence, full of truth, full of power. In silence, we hear what words drown out. Our intuition, our breath, our peace. The Buddha often taught without speaking, through gaze, through breath, through presence. Because sometimes silence holds a compassion too deep for language. So the next time you feel the urge to speak just to fill the air, pause. Let the silence speak for you. It may say more than words ever could. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to navigate relationships that drain your energy through Buddhist discernment, compassion, and honest rebalancing. Chapter 7, Energy Drainers. Navigating toxic relationships with Buddhist insight. Some people lift us. Their presence feels like a breath of fresh air. They leave us lighter, clearer, even after difficult conversations. They listen, they see us, they energize us without trying. And then there are others. People who leave us feeling drained, who always need something, but never really give back, who criticize more than they support, who take our time, our energy, our peace, and rarely, if ever, say thank you. We all know someone like this, and for many of us, especially those who value kindness and compassion, it's hard to know what to do about it, because walking away feels harsh, saying no feels selfish, and yet, staying feels like slow emotional erosion. So how do we navigate these relationships with grace, mindfulness, and wisdom? Buddhism offers profound insight. Recognizing what's draining you. The first step is awareness. Many of us don't realize just how much certain relationships cost us because we've normalized the exhaustion. We've convinced ourselves that it's just how things are. But mindfulness invites us to pause and notice. Do you feel anxious before seeing this person? Do you feel smaller after being with them? Do you feel obligated, not inspired to show up? These are red flags. In Buddhist practice, the quality of energy matters deeply. Everything is interdependent. Our mood, our health, even our karma, are affected by who we spend time with and how those interactions unfold. And sometimes protecting your peace is the most compassionate choice you can make. Compassion doesn't mean caring. There's a common misconception, especially among kind-hearted people, that being compassionate means tolerating everything. But Buddhism teaches a different kind of compassion, one that includes yourself. The Buddha never taught that we must stay in every relationship out of duty. He taught the importance of right association, surrounding yourself with people who support your path of awakening. So let's be clear, compassion doesn't mean accepting abuse, endlessly giving without receiving, silencing your needs to avoid conflict. Compassion means recognizing suffering, including your own, responding with care, not just to others, but to yourself. Choosing connection that uplifts, not connection that corrodes. You can love someone and still need distance. You can forgive someone and still need boundaries. This isn't cruelty, it's clarity. The Buddhist principle of wise association. The Buddha once said, if you cannot find a wise and compassionate companion, walk alone, like an elephant roaming the forest. This is not a call for isolation. It's a reminder that your path matters. In Buddhism, kalyana mittata, spiritual friendship, is essential. True friends nourish your practice. They remind you of your inner goodness. They support your efforts to live mindfully. Toxic relationships, on the other hand, are distractions. They pull you into drama, reactivity, and suffering. Choosing wise company isn't judgment, it's discernment. And discernment is compassion in action, a shift in perspective. They're suffering too. Now here's where Buddhist compassion deepens. Even those who drain us are suffering. Their negativity may come from unresolved pain. Their neediness may come from abandonment. Their manipulation may come from fear. This doesn't excuse their behavior, but it helps us respond with clarity and kindness. Instead of thinking they're awful, we can think they're in pain, and I choose not to absorb it. We shift from blame to boundaries, from resentment to release, from martyrdom to mindfulness. You are not responsible for healing someone who refuses to look within, but you are responsible for the energy you allow into your life. What to do when you can't walk away? Sometimes we can't cut ties completely because the person is a family member, a colleague, a co-parent. In these cases, mindfulness becomes your greatest ally. Here's what you can do. Set clear, energetic boundaries. You don't have to match their mood. Let them be stormy, you stay centered. Limit time and access. You can still love them, but in smaller doses. Release the need to fix or change them. Let go of the fantasy that your love will save them. Practice loving kindness from a distance. Send them peace, and then return to your own. These are not selfish moves. They are sacred acts of self-preservation. Try this, the 3-breath check-in. Before or after an interaction with someone who drains you, pause and take 3 conscious breaths. On the first breath, feel your body. On the second breath, release any tension. On the third breath, ask, am I holding on to what's not mine? Then exhale it out. Let go. Return to your center. You are allowed to protect your light. The Buddha never asked you to abandon yourself in service of others. He asked you to wake up, to see clearly, to live wisely, to choose love that heals, not love that hurts. So if a relationship drains you, pause, reflect, recenter, and remember, you are allowed to protect your energy. You are allowed to love without losing yourself. You are allowed to let go with compassion and grace. This is the path of mindful living, and this is your invitation to begin again. Thank you for walking with me this far. May you continue step by step toward a peace that doesn't need permission, a love that doesn't require sacrifice, and a version of you that is whole, worthy, and fully enough. So this is not the end of your kindness. It's the beginning of a new kind of kindness. Kindness with wisdom, kindness with boundaries, kindness that nourishes you instead of depleting you. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. And until we meet again, may you walk gently in awareness.